Hey guys, this is Mrs. Horseman, and today we are going to be talking about DNA structure. If you have seen this before, I'm sure that you have. This is a picture of a cartoon model of a DNA molecule. It's pretty standard. So today we're just going to talk about how that molecule is made and what the different parts of that structure look like. Here's some objectives that we're going to be working on. We're going to make sure that you know that the genetic information in DNA is determined by the order or the sequence of the nucleotides. We're going to relate that to the function of proteins. And then in another video, we're going to talk about the steps of DNA replication and why that's so important during the cell cycle. Today, we're just going to focus on the structure. So I have this little video for you that I want you to watch, and it's gonna kind of introduce you a little bit to the structure of DNA.
Stanley clearly presents, what is DNA and how does it work? DNA, also known as deoxyribonucleic acid, is a molecule. It's a bunch of atoms stuck together. In the case of DNA, these atoms combine to form the shape of a long, spiraling ladder, sort of like this one here. If you ever studied biology or saw the movie Jurassic Park, you probably heard that DNA acts as a blueprint or a recipe for a living thing. But how? How on earth can a mere molecule act as a blueprint for something as complex and wonderful as a tree, a dog, or a dinosaur? To help answer that question, let's first take a quick look at amino acids. Amino acids are tiny little chemicals inside our bodies that are so important, they're often referred to as the building blocks of life. There's about 20 different kinds, each with their own unique shape. The neat thing about them is they can be attached to each other, kind of like Legos, to produce an endless variety of larger particles known as proteins. Amino acids make up proteins. Proteins, along with other chemicals, combine to form living cells. Cells make up tissues. Tissues make up organs, and organs, when they're all put together and functioning, of course, combine to form living creatures like you and me. These proteins that make up our bodies, and keep in mind there's millions of different kinds of proteins, they each have to be formed in the perfect shape in order to function. If they're the wrong shape, they usually won't work. That's where DNA comes in. DNA does a lot of interesting things, some of which we don't fully understand, but one of its main and most well understood functions is to tell amino acids how to line up and form themselves into the perfect protein shapes. In theory, if the right proteins are built at the right time and in the right place, everything else from cells to organs to entire creatures will come out just fine. This here is a simplified model of DNA. It shows us that the steps of the ladder are made up of 4 different kinds of chemicals shown here by different colors and letters. If you look at just one half of the molecule, you can read its chemical sequence or genetic code from top to bottom, sort of like a book. A single strand of DNA is extremely long, millions of letters long. It spends most of its life coiled up like a noodle, living inside the nucleus or the centerpiece of a cell. Amino acids, however, live outside the nucleus in what's called the cytoplasm. To help DNA interact with the cytoplasm and convert those amino acids into proteins, special chemicals inside the nucleus make partial copies of the DNA code. These partial copies, called RNA, look a lot like DNA, but they're shorter, of course, and they're missing one of their sides. Their small shape and size allows them to fit through tiny pores in the nucleus, out to the cytoplasm, and into the mouth of another particle called a ribosome. Ribosomes are protein-building machines. They read the RNA code 3 letters at a time, suck amino acids out of their surroundings, and stick them together in a chain according to the RNA code. As the chain grows, it bends, it folds, and it sticks to itself to form a perfectly shaped protein. Every 3 letters of the RNA code tell the ribosome which of the 20 different kinds of amino acids should be added next. For example, CAA tells the ribosome to grab a glutamine. AGU tells it to grab a serine, and so on. Once a protein is built, it can then go on to do a number of different things, one of which could be to help form a brand new cell. So to answer the original question, what is DNA? DNA is a molecular blueprint for a living thing. How does it work? DNA creates RNA, RNA creates protein, proteins go on to form life. This entire process, as complicated, as sophisticated, as magical as it might seem, is entirely based in chemistry. It can be studied, it can be understood. I'm John Perry, and that's DNA stated clearly.
So that went a little bit more into detail than what we're going to talk about during this unit, but I kind of wanted to get you the overall picture of what DNA is and why it's really so important. It's not just the stuff that's located in the nucleus in all of your cells, it is the instructions for everything that happens in your body. So, DNA is really uniqueness. Every one of us are unique. Every organism actually is unique as long as there is sexual reproduction. And we'll talk about sexual reproduction versus asexual reproduction in another unit. But basically, sexual reproduction is when two organisms come together and their DNA is combined to create a new organism. So anytime that happens, the new organism is going to be unique to any other organism in that species because of their DNA. The DNA is what makes you who you are, okay? So we have learned that it is found in the nucleus of our cells, and we are eukaryotic organisms. In prokaryotic organisms, it's a little bit different. Prokaryotes have a single loop of DNA in the middle of their cell. So here is a picture of a bacterial cell, and you can see this one little loop all curled up in the middle of this very simple single-celled organism. We, on the other hand, as eukaryotic cells, are a lot more complex, and we actually have a ton more DNA, and that DNA is going to be all coiled up and found right here in the middle of the cell. Okay, so what does it look like? DNA a lot is called a twisted ladder, or it's also referred to as a spiral staircase, and this holds the genetic information for any individual, okay? Really what we're going to call it is a double helix. A helix is a ladder shape, okay? And there's two sides of it, so this is called a double helix. So what does DNA stand for? DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Just in case you didn't hear me, deoxyribonucleic acid. One more time. It is deoxyribonucleic acid. All right, that is a lot of words, and what we're going to do is call it DNA. And you are going to understand that we call it deoxyribonucleic acid because of what it's made up of, okay? Deoxyribose is just a kind of sugar. That's all it is. The nucleic acid part are molecules that make up, or the building blocks that make up DNA, RNA, ATP, and a few other different things that we won't really focus on this year. But all of those things are made up of three different sections, or three different parts. It's made up of a phosphate, a sugar, and a base, okay? And you have talked about ATP when we talked about the energy of metabolism. And you know that ATP had a sugar, it had a nitrogen base, and it had three phosphate groups, and that's where all the energy was contained within the bonds of those three phosphates. So, DNA is definitely an important type of nucleic acid, and we found this really funny. Ms. Rakers and I said that we just got a giggle out of this. So if you can't read it, it says, apparently your DNA is composed of battery acids instead of nucleic acids. And if you don't know who that is Frankenstein, and you definitely need to look that up. So really, what are nucleic acids made out of? Nucleic acids, so we're going to be focusing on DNA and RNA, Those are long chains of nucleotides, okay? And every nucleotide is made up of these three basic parts. There's a nitrogen base, and you can see that right here. There is a phosphate group over here, and there is a sugar right here, okay? In DNA, the sugar is deoxyribose. Okay, that's that part that I just talked about. Deoxyribose is that pentose or 5-carbon sugar. Okay, and that is the very center part of this nucleotide. It's attached to a phosphate group here and then attached to a nitrogenous base here. This nitrogenous base is really important in DNA and RNA. If you look at it in a DNA strand, here is one nucleotide, and it is combined with many other nucleotides to form this great big stack, okay? And then these nucleotides are also going to bond to complementary nucleotides on the other side, which is going to make up that double strand. We talked about this as a double helix or a ladder. Okay, so you can see the ladder. Here's the backbone, and here are the rungs of the ladder. The backbone is the phosphate and the sugar, and it goes all the way down, or that would be the sides of the ladder. Phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, and it alternates all the way down. And then the rungs of that ladder are the nitrogenous bases, and those are held together in DNA with hydrogen bonds, okay? And the only reason why that's important is because hydrogen bonds can be very easily broken, so when we talk about replication, that actually plays a pretty significant role. All right, so what does DNA look like? The sequence of nucleotides is actually what determines our unique genetic information. So here is one nucleotide, so when you get a whole bunch of them stacked on each other, the sequence of what makes those up determines what our DNA is. All right, so the shape of the DNA, we said it was a double helix, is formed by the alternating sugars and phosphates in the backbone with the nitrogenous bases that are bonded together in the middle. And then when that whole DNA pieces together, it twists up, so it actually does look like a twisted ladder. It kind of reminds me of one of those like old library looking staircases that winds up in the really tall library buildings, or some of the older buildings that are in downtown St. Charles. Kind of cool. Way back when, in the late 50s, there were some important scientists that actually discovered what the shape of DNA looks like. Hopefully you've heard of Watson and Crick. They are the ones that put together the original structure model of DNA with the help of a woman scientist named Rosalind Franklin. They came up with what DNA looks like. So before they came up with what that looked like, we kind of thought, got a giggle out of this too. So as you can see from the model, the structure is basically a long, twisty, rope laddery type thing. So before they really knew what DNA looked like, scientists could guess at it. But now that we know what it looks like, we can definitely describe it a little bit more accurately than a twisty rope laddery type thing. The pattern of the DNA sequence is uniform, okay? So the genetic information is determined by the sequence or the order of the bases. So just like a word is determined by the sequence of the letters, the gene is determined by the sequence of the bases. In DNA, there are 4 different kinds of bases: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, okay? It is very important. You need to remember that those 4 different bases are the types of bases that are in DNA. We have a base pairing rule, and that says that adenine always pairs with thymine. Always, always, always. Guanine always pairs with cytosine. Always, always, always. And they are held together with hydrogen bonds. And I told you before that that's going to be important when we talk about DNA replication, but these little dots, these little dotted lines right here, right here, right here, those are all significant. Those are representing the hydrogen bonds. So there's 3 between these, and there's 2 between these. And I just told you that adenine always pairs with thymine. So here we have an adenine and a thymine in this DNA model. another adenine, and a thymine, a guanine, and a cytosine, all right? These will always, always, always be paired together. If they're not, that is a major problem, and that's something that we call a mutation. So here again is our DNA structure. Here's our backbone, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, nitrogen base bonded to another nitrogen base with hydrogen bonds, okay? The reason that we have this base pairing rule is because this amazing scientist named Chargaff, before he even knew what DNA looked like, was the one who discovered that the amount of adenine is equal to the amount of thymine, and the amount of guanine is equal to the amount of cytosine in any type of DNA molecule. So after he figured that out, that actually really helped Watson and Crick determine what DNA actually looked like. So that was a very significant discovery. Because of that, we call that Chargaff's rule. Okay, so Chargaff's rule just states adenine and thymine will be in equal amounts in any DNA molecule. Guanine and cytosine will be in equal amounts in any DNA molecule. So because of that, we scientists determined that adenine and thymine pair together, cytosine and guanine pair together. So why is that so important? Why is it so important that we know the sequence of bases and how they pair together? Well, I told you before that strands of unique sequences of bases are what make up genes. And those genes are super important because that is what makes up who you are. Well, the reason that makes up who you are is because those genes code for proteins. And they talked about that a little bit in that video that we showed you. Some genes make up single proteins. Other genes code for whole groups of proteins. And here is some very colorful, they're really not this colorful. This is just like this to show you what they look like. But these are all different proteins. And every protein has a different shape, and every shape has a different function or a different job, okay? Proteins are important because they make up so many different things inside of you. And here's just a few examples. They make up your body structure, which is your muscle and your bone and your hair and your skin and your cartilage and the tendons that are in your body. So basically, they make up all of the structure of who you are. They are enzymes, and enzymes are very special proteins that speed up chemical reactions. We've talked about a few of those chemical reactions in class already. We have talked about photosynthesis and cell respiration. Those can't happen without enzymes. And those enzymes are very special proteins that are basically just helpers for any reaction that happens in your body, okay? They're really important because they help fight diseases. The antibodies that you have floating around all inside of you that help you when you're sick are made up of proteins. And if you didn't have those antibodies, you would be much more sick than you actually feel when you get a cold or something like that. Another important example of what proteins are is that they carry oxygen through the blood. There is protein called hemoglobin that is very important because it picks up the oxygen out of your lungs and carries it to the cells that are all over your body so that your cells can go through cell respiration and give your body energy. And then it picks up carbon dioxide as your cells release that and takes it back to the lungs so that your body can get rid of that because we don't need that anymore. If we didn't have hemoglobin in our bodies, we would not be able to do that and we would not live very long. So here's a quick check. We will go over these questions in class, but I just want you to think about these and kind of jot down some answers while we go. I'll pause for a couple of seconds in between each question so you can jot down your thoughts, okay? So 1, what is the name for the shape of DNA? What does DNA stand for? What do we call that? Second question, DNA is made up of a twisted ladder of alternating, what was that building block that we said DNA is made up of? Question number 3, what 3 things make up a nucleotide? Number 4, how many nitrogen bases are there? Write down their names. Number 5, describe the base pairing rule. What did we say that meant? Base pairing rule. And number 6, how are proteins important? We talked about quite a few examples just a minute ago. So just write down 2 or 3. All right, so hopefully you learned a lot about DNA structure today. We'll talk about this more in class and review. You definitely need to know this, one, because we're going to test on it, but also because next we're going to learn about DNA replication, and you definitely need to know about the structure of DNA before you can figure out how more of it is made. All right, so make sure that you write down all of your questions, and we will make sure that we go over it in class, and have a great day.